Okay, we are live. We are back discussing Mitra again, and we're going hopefully to conclude to discuss the remaining important aspects of the Mitra type deity, going through our deity chart Mythstream, and really trying to get across this interpretation of Zeus and Jupiter as a Mitra type primarily, and really a clarification of the Mitra type, hopefully, and all of that. Again, as we mentioned before, it really seems like the Mitra type is not well understood, and Dyዔws describes this as being the result of the minimization of Mitra in the Vedas, his disarming and sort of pushing aside. And so because the Vedas there's this bias toward the Vedas, there is this heavy focus on the Vedas as the most archaic text. If you look there and you look at Mitra, he seems like this minimized, less important deity, so then he doesn't get factored into these comparative equations. But as we showed last time, he's actually maybe the key to understanding who Zeus actually is. So if you ignore this whole problem, you may be going in the wrong direction. So we are going to, when Josephus gets here, when he gets back, we are going to go into the etymological issue a little bit of the name Zeus, the etymology of Zeus, and the name of the Vedic god Dyዔws Pitar, and how they connect in one way, but how there's this actually a change in the semantic, in the meaning of the name that becomes Dyዔws, and how there is actually this mismatch, especially mythologically, which then suggests a linguistic change, a changing of the names, and how this needs to be clarified, and what's going on there. Why are the names Zeus and Dyዔws seemingly connected or the same, yet these seem to be actually different gods? So we will see when Josephus is back to discuss that. Are you back now to talk?
Yes, I'm ready to discuss.
Okay. All right, excellent. Well, perfect. And so yeah, one of the issues I really want to forefront is, so the root of Zeus is Dyēw, right? Is it Dyēw or Dyēws? The Proto-Indo-European root of Zeus, Josephus.
Yes, Dyēw is
Dyēw.
the root. So obviously, Indo-European roots work by having basically usually three consonants. Sometimes it's two, sometimes it's four, but it's usually three. And then the vowels can be inserted. So in this case, we have basically the consonant D. There's a whole debate on whether they should be pronounced as a D or a T or like a glottalic sound. It's not really important. What's important is that we have a D, the palatal consonant, which is basically Y, and the labiovelar consonant, which is W. So the, Y, W, we can put vowels in between those consonants in various ways. So we can have Dyēw or we can have Dyēw. And that's kind of the key to the issue here. These are the same root, but they are two different forms of the same root. So having the vowel in one position or in the other position is going to change the meaning and the usage of that word, right? It's not going to be the same word. Just as in English, you sometimes have the plural marked by a change in the vowel, although that's due to other phenomena, usually, etymologically speaking. But we do have in Indo-European languages a system in which the vowel can be placed in different positions and change the meaning of the root. Usually, not usually the meaning per se, but the grammatical function of the word, right? So we have Dyēws as the nominative. So the final S is the mark of the nominative case, which is the basically the subject of a sentence. There's a whole debate on whether Indo-European was originally ergative, so it didn't really have a nominative. It's pretty bothersome and it's not relevant to the question, so I'm not going to delve too deep into it. Now, what we see in this Wiktionary reconstruction, first of all, it's an empirical reconstruction. Now, in Indo-European linguistics, some scholars prefer empirical reconstructions, and some scholars prefer to reconstruct things by going for internal reconstruction and ultimately getting to earlier assumed forms of what we have by empirical means. So this long vowel that we see here is probably due to later sound changes, some form of analogy to the accusative case. So we can imagine a prehistoric form with a short e, like a short e vowel, instead of this long one that we see here. But at any rate, in the oblique forms, so the other cases such as the genitive and the dative, we have no vowel at all. So it's a pretty solid root noun, right? So in the Wiktionary page that you are seeing in front of you, that is being showed on screen, the main definition of Dyēws is provided as sky or heaven, and then a secondary definition is sky god. Dyēws is obviously just a transcription of the word, so it's the sky god that's supposed to be in the linguistic centered reconstruction. It's supposed to be basically the same as Zeus and Dyēws, which is obviously not really compatible with the mythological reconstruction that we've been discussing and arguing for in our Mythstreams. So the Wiktionary reconstruction, which is obviously based on works by scholars, of course, it's not taken out of the blue, but is actually faulty. So the main issue is that sky and heaven are only definitions of the word Dyēws in Indo-Iranic languages. And even in Iranic languages, it's not really too common. We don't have many evidence for this usage. So the main evidence for Proto-Indo-European Dyēws, meaning originally sky, comes from Sanskrit. Sanskrit Dyaush is the word for sky. Dyaush is the nominative. You can find the same word quoted in the form dyu or div. These are root forms without any suffix. Dyaush obviously has the suffix marking the nominative case and the long vowel, which becomes a diphthong in Sanskrit, as we would expect based on our empirical reconstruction as well. So on one hand, we have Sanskrit Dyaush, which is pretty clearly a word meaning sky or heaven. On the other hand, we have no other Indo-European language in which descendants of Dyēws have this meaning. And on the contrary, we have words such as Latin dies and also Celtic cognates of this word that seem to pretty clearly mean day and not sky or heaven. So obviously, okay, let's look. Obviously, we have Celtic cognate meaning day. Now, I don't recall whether Armenian also means day. I think it does mean day. But we can check that. Yeah, it means day or daytime. So I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So Armenian, Italic, Celtic all seem to agree. Hittite Dyēws should probably be discussed under Dyēws rather than under Dyēws. It's also only attested once, so maybe there's more about the meaning, definition, and usage of this word that we simply don't know about. But the branches that do have good evidence all seem to show that this word means day, except for basically Indo-Iranic and mainly Sanskrit. Now, I'm seeing the comments arguing that the English word day derives from Dyēws. Now, this is not the case. I know it's very uncanny that English day looks so similar to Dyēws and to Latin dies and to other such words. However, English day actually comes from another root, which means to burn or to be hot, whereas Latin dies and the Celtic and Armenian cognates that we've discussed come from a root whose original meaning was probably to be bright or to shine, as correctly shown in these other dictionary entries. So, uh, obviously, the weight of Sanskrit has often been overstated, and this is not without good reason. Of course, Sanskrit has very ancient attestations. The Rig Veda is older than Greek literature. Um, it's not necessarily older than all Greek written texts, but it is older than all literature in Greek language. So it's definitely very relevant for comparative linguistics. And Sanskrit has a very transparent morphology. So obviously, Sanskrit morphology can help linguists understand the structure of Indo-European languages in a much clearer and more straightforward and more transparent way than, say, Latin could. And Latin is even clearer than, say, Germanic, and this may have to do simply with the time of the attestation of these languages, but also with the um, basically fixed sign versus internally articulated sign. This is kind of linguistic concepts I'm throwing around, but basically Sanskrit has an internally articulated sign, so it's very much straightforward. However, even if Sanskrit is morphologically more conservative, and this has been accepted by virtually every linguist dealing with Indo-European languages, it does not follow that Sanskrit is also semantically and phonologically more conservative. Some scholars in the 19th century and even later thought that Sanskrit was more phonologically and semantically conservative compared to other languages, but this is simply not the case, and we have plenty of evidence in which all Indo-European languages agree on one thing, and then Sanskrit, or maybe say the whole Indic branch or the whole Indo-Iranian branch, seem to agree on something different. So when this is the case, we can easily see that Sanskrit simply innovated, or that Indo-Iranian innovated, as opposed to the original common
Right.
Indo-European usage.
And
Right?
this,
This,
yeah, I just want to say this is really crucial because if you just favor the Sanskrit too strongly in your reconstruction, which seems to be the case in some of this Wiktionary material, it leaves you open to the possibility that it's actually the Sanskrit that innovated and that changed the semantics of this word to mean sky specifically, and it maybe originally only meant day, or as we see with the root here, bright or to shine. So do you think this deeper root without the suffix or without the s, to be bright to shine, is that accurate, or should that, do you think that root also is more like day, or it's more about shining?
well, I think it's probably accurate. We do have some evidence that it should probably have meant to be bright or to shine, such as the Greek adjective dios, which
Hmm.
basically comes from earlier diwios. I think we have linear B attestation of the feminine diwia, so we know it's supposed to be from that root, and it does mean shining. So definitely there is some point for the root to mean to shine,
Hmm.
and obviously the noun deriving from the verb to shine would be obviously the noun day. Day, especially as in the part of the day when the sun shines, right? So the bright part of the day, as opposed to night. And this is actually crucial to the whole Mitriac discourse. Like, obviously, the Mitriac deity is closely associated with day as opposed to night. Night is more of a Varuna kind of trait. and this obviously is reflected in the usage of epithets. So we will get to that later about
Yeah.
Dyዔws.
So it's crucial to understand that Wiktionary, that even Wiktionary and its sources can be biased in these ways and can be presenting, a reconstruction that may be, emphasizing things a little bit wrongly. Ultimately, I think it's crucial to look at the sources that they cite, and then also the the article that I mentioned last time is called "The Sky God of the Indo-Europeans" by Lotte Matz, and she goes through a bunch of different a bunch of different arguments of actual linguists who have looked at this very closely, and she shows that the outcome of those analyses is that we have all the meanings in these other branches other than Sanskrit. They all mean something like day or shining, and so if you are inferring that the original meaning was sky, as we have here, we have it listed as the second meaning. But if you're inferring that, it's you only have one. You only really have one branch, which is Sanskrit. It's all isolated to Sanskrit, this meaning of sky. So it's entirely possible that it didn't originally mean sky, or that sky is just sort of like something that it could come to signify in a secondary or tertiary way, because you're talking about the day, the shining of the day, and then that can then secondarily associate with the place of the sky, and then that can come to be its meaning in Sanskrit, it seems like, but not elsewhere. So, anyways, if you look at the article by Lotte Matz, she gives a very strong argument that this really should not be reconstructed as sky originally. So you could at least question this meaning number 2 here, and at very least you should firmly place it as a secondary meaning, and not the original meaning. So even here we have the number 1 meaning is actually to be bright or to shine, as we were talking about, and that connecting more to day. And so this just has to be understood, that the Proto-Indo-European root, it really primarily meant shining or day, and that's the meaning that comes down in the name of Zeus and elsewhere. Zeus is not really, his name doesn't really mean Sky Father or Father Sky or anything like that, because the meaning of that word in Greek was actually more like day. Is that how you would describe that?
Yes, of course. The original meaning would have been day. It's not entirely clear to what extent the ancient Greeks would remember the usage of Zeus as a common, basically as a common noun as opposed to a proper name. So we know that some expressions seem to suggest even a meaning like day or sky, but it's unclear to what extent they are just derivative from the deity's name. So what happens is that we didn't maybe mention it in the relevant live stream, or maybe we did, but the sky deity is usually named with the word for sky in the language of the people worshiping that deity, right? So the common Greek noun meaning sky is Uranos, and so the deity of sky is also named Uranos. The common Latin word for sky is caelum, so the deity of sky is called Caelus, which is just the masculine form of caelum, which would be a neuter noun, and so it would not be applicable to any living being, and so not to a god, but it's the same word ultimately. So likewise in Sanskrit, the word for sky is Dyዔws, and so the god of the sky is also named Dyěws. This is pretty obvious and standard even, So obviously, the fact that Sanskrit is using the Sanskrit word for sky to denote the god of sky is pretty straightforward, and it does line up with other gods of sky. Maybe the exception would be Mathaluk. Mathaluk looks like an epithet, basically, um, that could have been applied to a sky god originally, but in the version of the myth that we have for Welsh people, we only have Mathaluk and not the word for sky. But at any rate,
But it seems to match an epithet of the Vedic Dyaush.
yeah, precisely. So we do even have a possible Indo-European origin for that kind of name. But at any rate, it's pretty clear that the word for sky is simply the name of the god of sky, right? On the other hand, deities such as Jupiter and Zeus have names which, in their respective languages, are proper names and they're only proper names. So obvious, or if not only proper names, like you could argue that in some passages it could be understood more metaphorically, but as a rule of thumb, they are proper names. They are not common nouns used outside of religious imagery. So obviously, this tends to show that the original meaning as a proper name was probably what we would expect from Zeus and Jupiter as we know them from Greek and Roman mythology, right? As opposed to Dyaush, who simply happens to be the god of sky without any further depth to the choice of name, right? If Sanskrit had any other word for sky, that would be the name of Dyaush, and not and Dyaush would not be the name of like a generic sky god, right?
Right. So does this imply then that we should picture that the semantic change happened first, that somehow the name Dyaush, the proto name, the Dyaush, whenever this was, in Sanskrit or in Indo-Aryan, that meaning change happened where that word from originally in Proto-Indo-European meaning to be bright or day, it then shifted to being more connected to the sky itself in the Indo-Aryan or Sanskrit period. And then once that meaning change was established, now it's the common name for sky, which it had not been before. And then at that point, it just becomes one of the names, or it becomes the main name of the embodied sky itself, the Uranos type god, who they already had clearly, but going under different name. There's some obvious linguistic shifts happening around here, where at some point this Dyaush came to be the name for sky, which it had not been before. And so at that point, after that semantic change happened, then that name would have become applied to this embodied sky, this Uranos type god for the Vedics. Is that how we should be picturing it?
Yeah, precisely. That's probably what happened. I mean, I'm pretty confident that's the best explanation for what we have. So obviously, this is a part of the picture. So the name Dyēw. The other part of the picture is the other form of the same root, Dyēw. So we have the vowel after the first consonant and before the second consonant, right? And this is the origin of Dyēws. Dyēws in Indo-European languages has a double meaning. So it could be a generic name for any god, usually, obviously, one of the social gods, as we would say in a Dumézilian manner. So the gods of society, the gods of the three functions. And it can also be the proper name of a deity, right? So when it's a proper name of a deity, it's always the god of justice, oaths. So it's really a Mitra type. It's pretty straightforward. We have Tyr among the Nordics, and we have Dyēws, Fidius among the Romans. So Dyēws is pretty clearly denoting this kind of Mitriac kind of deity, as opposed to any generic deity if used as a proper name.
Yes. So yeah. So just to clarify or reiterate, this is a different derivative, a different formation from this same root, Dyēws, but it's undergone a lengthening, a special kind of linguistic lengthening, which can change the usage or the meaning, right?
Yeah, precisely. I
Yeah,
mean, Dyēws is a thematic noun as opposed to Dyēws, which is a thematic.
right,
Usually, thematic nouns tend to be older in a language. So maybe the thematic noun Dyēws could have started as an adjective, maybe
mm,
like the shining one or the daytime one. I'm thinking of maybe the daytime one as opposed to a Varuna type who could have been called the nighttime one. And we do actually have that pretty clearly in Roman mythology with Dyēws, whose name obviously etymologically means the daytime god,
right,
as opposed to Nocturnus, whose name literally means the nighttime one. So he's the god of the night.
okay,
And obviously Mitra. Now, going back to Mitra, Mitra is obviously an innovative name in the Indo-Iranian branch. So we see that in Sanskrit, we see that in Avestan, but we do not see any form equivalent to Mitra in other branches,
but
right?
we do see potentially Lu
Yeah,
could mean,
we do see,
a similar thing. So it
no,
could have been like
we
a
do see
floating
like,
concept. Yeah.
yeah,
Could have been
even
like an
Dyēws has a
epithet.
similar
Oh,
meaning.
sorry, sorry.
No,
Yes.
what I was arguing basically is that Mitra, even if there are forms with the similar meaning in other languages,
Ah,
right,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
what we can get into as well if we want to, and we probably should, talking about Lu. But even we have forms with the same meaning. Linguistically, we have no cognizance of Mitra as a deity name in the other branches.
Yeah.
However, Mitra is often referred to with the epithet Deva. Deva is the descendant of Dyēws. And obviously, Mitra as a deva is contrasted with Varuna as an asura. Asura is another kind of deity. In older translations into English, you will often find Titan instead of Asura. I feel like this is actually very appropriate as a translation. But at any rate, Mitra as the Deva, so as the daytime deity, as opposed to Varuna, the Asura, the other kind of deity, the more obscure and unruly deity.
Right.
And so obviously, this usage of Deva as an epithet of Mitra lines up pretty nicely with Tur and Dyēws that we see in the western part of the Indo-European world. And this obviously is a strong argument in favor of Dyēws having been used specifically for the daytime sovereign in his aspect as a god of oath and justice, basically.
Right, right. Okay. That makes sense. And yeah, it's just fascinating and frustrating when there is this kind of seemingly exact linguistic match between Zeus and Dyaush Pitar, and but it's more complicated than that, and even the linguists recognize this, and the mythologists recognize this. Lotte Motz concludes that there's essentially nothing connecting Zeus and Dyaush, and that their etymologies actually, their actual meaning of the words, actual meanings of their names are actually different, and so something has changed here. But it's so hypnotic, this seeming equivalence of the names. It's almost impossible for most people to get past this seeming direct connection between Zeus and Dyaush. To see that, yeah, complicated things can happen in the change of languages, and it seems like this god type name changed in meaning in the Sanskrit branch to a completely different, related meaning. Sky is related to day and shining, but it came to mean something different, and then that name came to be applied to a separate, different god that already existed, but got renamed, and then that the Mitra type got had got an innovated name himself based on, his role, and probably epithets that he already had were related to this. So in any case, you have to be able to envision that something complicated may indeed have happened here, and it's hard. It's challenging to get past the initial appearance of a direct equivalency of Zeus and Dyās. But hopefully that makes it somewhat clear on the linguistic side. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on that topic, or should we move to some mythic comparisons?
So just a quick remark. Obviously, the question could be, how about Dyēws as opposed to Deity, right? Deity is really straightforward. So we see it as the name of the Mitric sovereign. As for Dyēws, I think that the best reconstruction is that it was probably used as a name of the sovereign god, as a sort of super sovereign, encompassing both the daytime sovereign and the nighttime sovereign. So basically, Deity would be a function of Dyēws, if that makes sense. Obviously, that's a possible reconstruction. Obviously, Latin is exactly in the same situation that we would expect from this reconstruction. In Greece, it's kind of different because we do see Zeus used also specifically for the daytime sovereign. So in Greece, we have no separate Deity as opposed to Dyēws. And so it's possible that some meanings originally associated with Dyēws were extended, with Deity were extended to Dyēws, and therefore to Zeus as we know him in Greek mythology. At any rate, there's just one reconstruction that could work better than assuming that Sanskrit is right and all the other branches are not on the usage of Dyēws.
Right. And so, with some caveats, it's always interesting to me that, the sort of journey of trying to understand Tyr and this god type, it always goes that, Tyr seems to be similar to Zeus and Dyās. And so you might initially think Tyr is directly connected to them. And then you learn a bit more, and you'll have it clarified to you that actually Tyr comes from this lengthening derivation, Dyēws, which is it's actually technically a different, it's an indirect connection to this original root. Therefore, Tyr is not really the same name, not really the same meaning as Zeus or Dyās. Therefore, it's an error to equate them. And then if you go further along, you see actually, the Zeus equals Dyās falls apart mythically. And then if you go into the linguistics, you can see that a semantic change, a change in meaning seems to have happened in the Sanskrit side, making the name meanings actually completely different. And they seem to then be applied to different god types. And that makes sense of the mythical mismatch. And it works that way. And ultimately, you come to realize, at least if you follow, what I've been arguing, what we've been arguing, you come to realize that Zeus and Tyr actually do have mythic alignment, and they are both primarily the daytime sovereign. Ultimately, in the end, despite what you learned originally, that actually Tyr is a different derivation from this root. And Zeus is, they don't linguistically actually match one-to-one. When you come full circle, you realize actually they are kind of the same. They are essentially the same god type, although Zeus, again, as Josephus mentioned, Zeus symbolizes the totality of the sovereign a bit more so than Tyr does. But yeah, so hopefully that kind of maps out the process of getting more and more clarity on this. But I always find it funny, you kind of picture like the bell chart meme of like Zeus equals Tyr on the low IQ side, and then like Tyr doesn't equal Zeus in the middle of the bell curve, and then the higher end of the bell curve, you realize again actually Tyr does equal Zeus. They are the same god type, and this can be solidified really only by the mythic parallels, though, once you understand those more deeply. But hopefully that linguistic side helps to clarify how those things can be shifting and still making sense. So the next piece of foundational comparative material that we need to understand a bit is the comparison that Dymas makes, one of his best, one of his most brilliant comparisons, which is, it's a bit conceptual. It's a bit kind of, you have to envision it and go along with the connections he's making. But if you do, then it makes the whole picture make sense, and that's kind of how it confirms the validity, the greater validity of this comparison. So you have to like test it and go with it for a bit. But basically, what he argues is that we have the death of Balder scene as this important, this crucial event in the Norse mythology, and we have Balder as the victim of the arrow of Hother, who is the blind one throwing the sprig of mistletoe, and Loki, the demonic presence, who is being deceptive and tricking him into throwing the mistletoe at Balder to send him to hell, the underworld, to get him out of the picture for a time, and also to seemingly precipitate the oncoming war of the end times in some way. It's somehow connected to that. And we have in the Mahabharata, Dymas explains how this inciting event of the Great War is this famous dice game of Yudhishthira, the king, the Mitra type that we described last time. And Yudhishthira is goaded into participating in this dice game against Duryodhana and Shakuni. And Duryodhana is this incarnation of the demon Kali, the demon of the end times, and Shakuni is this incarnation of the demon of the Dvapara Yuga, which is the age right before the Kali Yuga. So they're kind of the double-headed, late stage demon incarnations in some sense, and so we have the Mitra type being goaded into this dice game, and this dice game is overseen by a blind figure. So the father of Duryodhana is Dhritarashtra, and he is a blind king. It's very prominent that he is blind, and he allows this dice game to go forward, even though he is suspicious. He doesn't think, he hesitates, and he doesn't know if he should go forward. But ultimately, he kind of, as Dymas describes it, he allows fate to take place, kind of to flow through him as the overseer of this game, and so that what will be. And he allows Shakuni and his son Duryodhana to use deceptive means under his blind watch to defeat Yudhishthira in a series of dice games, and take everything that Yudhishthira has in the world, including his kingship, all his wealth, and finally his wife. And Yudhishthira and his brothers end up exiled into the wilderness for a set amount of time. And so it is this ultimate defeat of the Mitra type. And along with this event, Yudhishthira has an uncle who is named Vidura, and Vidura is there as kind of an advisor. He's present in this sequence as this advisor, and Dymas notes that when Yudhishthira gets exiled and loses everything, Vidura also disappears from the scene until the very end of the whole war, when Vidura comes back to rule with Yudhishthira when they regain the kingdom ultimately. So So in any case, this Dumasil describes how, it is the mytheme at the core of this is it's the inciting event. It's an inciting event of the final kind of cataclysmic war of the gods, embodied in their incarnations in the Mahabharata, and it involves the demon Kali, essentially, as the antagonist, and then that would be Loki, and using deceptive means. And he also points to another version where it's not the incarnation of Kali, but Kali himself using, or actually, magically possessing a set of dice in order to do a similar to win to cause another hero to lose everything. So it involves this magically loaded dice. In the Norse version, the sprig of mistletoe is this magically sort of it's I don't know, it's not cursed, but it is magically charged. It has not sworn the oath to do no harm to Balder, so therefore it is magically able to penetrate Balder's invulnerability.
I'd like to add that in the other version of the Balder myth, the mistletoe is a magic sword, so it has more
magical charge. Yeah. So there's more explicitly a magical item, and then in both cases, it is this blind figure allowing the demonic power of fate to flow through him in a way. So you see Loki holding Hother's hand and guiding him to throw the dart. That is the demonic power flowing through the blind one who is there and sort of allowing it to happen. Dumasil explains this as the fact that Dhritarashtra, the blind king, is actually said to be the incarnation of the god Bhaga. And Bhaga is the god of destiny, essentially, the god of allotted share, of apportionment of one's share, and so destiny. So he is this blind fate god in a way. So he allows fate or destiny to flow through him, and he has his eyes blind. It's this sort of classic concept, and that seems to be then what is being reflected in Hother's role in the Norse story. Bhaga is Bhaga, Bhaga, and so he then describes how Vidura, the uncle who disappears at the same time, in the Mahabharata, it's actually explained that Vidura and Yudhishthira are both incarnated from the same god called Dharma, and when Vidura dies, he says he is going to basically be absorbed back into Dharma, and that he addresses Yudhishthira and he says, "You and I are one," essentially. So Dumasil explains that this is because Vidura is the god Aryaman, and Yudhishthira is primarily the god Mitra Dharma, and so together they kind of make one, because in the Vedas, Aryaman is like this extension of Mitra, is like this satellite deity of Mitra in specific set of roles involving hospitality, involving the in-group of the noble society and nobility and things like this. So it's complex, but essentially he is saying that Balder embodies this Aryaman aspect of the Mitra, actually. So that in the Norse case, the Aryaman aspect, aka Balder, this kind of pure nobility side of Mitra, which is embodied more in the Vidura, that has taken the center stage in this myth type. However, it's still kind of the same myth type at its core, and that actually it was Tyr, like we mentioned, who is the Mitra type, but he's kind of been pushed to the side in the narrative. Personally, I think it makes perfect sense, especially when you test that out and how that makes the larger picture fit. But that would mean that Tyr and Balder are kind of these connected deities in an esoteric sense. but that Balder, embodies this. He's kind of like too pure for this world, too noble for this world, and he becomes the victim. It's really him who is killed temporarily in this myth type, and Balder goes to the underworld and comes back at the end of Ragnarok to be one of the rulers, which is exactly what Vidura does, joining Yudhishthira at the end there. So, that is kind of the quick rundown of that. This is a fundamental myth comparison to understand any of the other ones we want to bring together here. So hopefully that makes sense. Anything that should be clarified in that, you guys?
I think it was pretty clear. Obviously, if anyone doesn't find it clear, I invite people to comment in like the comment section. Also about the Aryaman thing, it might be worth keeping in mind how Dyməsil calls Bhaga and Aryaman the minor sovereigns. So
Right.
clearly, that kind of term might be useful even like going on if we don't want to mention every single minor sovereign by name every time.
Right, they're minor sovereigns, so they're kind of satellites or aspects of the super sovereign, and so that's how he understands them. So that would mean that he actually calls Bhaga another minor sovereign. So like these are like both aspects or satellite gods of the super sovereign. So here's just the quick passage of Dyməsil from Gods of the Ancient Northmen. He says, "Consider now the drama itself in its 3 stages. The demonic Loki uses the blind Hoder to eliminate the good Balder, here to send him by death into the long exile of hell. He uses a game, which Balder, invulnerable in principle, has every right to believe harmless, but in which he is killed by the only weapon remaining which is dangerous to him, a weapon discovered by Loki and activated by the blind Hoder under Loki's direction. The method is parallel to that which results in the provisional elimination and long exile of Yudhishthira. The demonic Duryodhana wrings authorization from the blind Dhritarashtra to stage the scenario that will destroy Yudhishthira. This scenario is a game that is apparently without any particular danger for Yudhishthira. So Yudhishthira kind of thinks he's invulnerable like Balder does, who is an average player, but it is one in which his adversary, accomplice of Duryodhana, uses supernatural tricks that force him beaten into exile. The 2 principal differences are, 1, the differing specifications of the games dice in India, where dice are the typical game, and a more spectacular and romantic game in Scandinavia, and 2, the greater degree of blame on the part of the blind Indian, who knows to what misfortune his action will lead, and does it nevertheless through weakness, while the blind Scandinavian is entirely an involuntary instrument and is unconscious of the trick of the evil one. In Scandinavia, the responsibility is divided simply between Loki and instigator and Hother, the blind killer by hand, and purely a material agent. So these differences allow the essential parallel to remain, but would be sufficient to set aside the hypothesis of a lone or even of literary influence by India or Scandinavia, if it were otherwise possible to form such a hypothesis. The scene of the fatal game in the 2 stories opens a long dark period, the whole course of the present world in Scandinavia. In India, only the time that Yudhishthira and his brothers are in exile. In India, the time is reduced to a few years by the requirements of epic limits, but in the original myth, it also must have been the final part of a cosmic age, since the one responsible, the demonic Duryodhana, is precisely the incarnation of the evil spirit of the present age." Okay, so he goes through, obviously, some of the differences and connections and how the core remains. In the world that is reborn, purified, and delivered from evil after the eschatological battle and the cataclysm, Balder and Hoder being reconciled, they take the place of the sovereigns, Balder holding simultaneously, as has been said, the roles of Yudhishthira and Vidura. So, it's something that has to, be tested and confirmed. But for me, in my book, I went through a whole chapter showing the connections between Tyr and Mitra broadly, which are the other part of this, because it would be possible that Balder is just Mitra, right, in this scenario. But if actually Tyr still has all this Mitraic material, then it does make more sense that what has happened is Mitra, that Tyr has kind of been pushed out of this story, or just not included in this version of the story, and that is his kind of the Ahriman aspect, the Balder aspect, has taken the center stage, as Dymě describes it.
This kind of goes back to like the same argument about the etymology, because like Tyr obviously has been demoted to a certain extent in the later Icelandic myths that we have, which were not really the most archaic version of the myth, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like Tyr and Balder are both sons of Odin, and you see Tyr's myth is greatly shortened compared to Balder.
Yeah.
Maybe this had to do with like some sort of cult competition. Obviously, Odin became way higher up on the totem than the Mitra type god did in other branches like Greek and Roman. But
right. And
there is the argument that
go for it.
There is the argument that like, oh, Tyr was the head god, the sky god before Odin. But I don't that obviously goes back to the same etymology thing, where like it's just kind of based on a faulty reading of a term that is loosely associated with his name. But there's definitely more to Tyr than there is in.
Yeah. I think it happens. We have a fragmented set of what the Norse religion and mythology was, even at the time that it's from, and that's only a version from that time. So yeah, as Dymě says, the degradation of Tyr is the reason, moreover, that the latter does not play a role in the tragedy, except accessorily at the time of the final battle, and that it is Balder who concentrates in himself the essences of Mitra and Ahriman, the roles that the Mahabharata distributes between Yudhishthira and Vidura. But we know how close Mitra and his principal collaborator were to Vedic and pre-Vedic times, and we have seen that the Mahabharata goes so far as to make Yudhishthira and a Vidura a kind of doubling of the same god, Dharma, a doubling that only the death of the second by returning into the first brings back into a unity. So it's complex, but it's something that has to be understood. I recommend my chapter on Tyr equals Mitra to show kind of some of the more specific roles, epithets, qualities of Tyr that really confirm that he is also Mitra more so. And I do think like Balder's sort of fragility, his like purity, this sort of fact that he's driven out of the story completely and has to spend most of the battle in hell. All of this suggests that he's not really the main Mitra, in my opinion, that he's more this too good for this world aspect that is that should be identified with Ahriman, the god of the noble quality, the hospitality, all these kind of pure virtues, and that Tyr is rather the more, well, his name itself connects, as we've described, and he is the one who's more the warrior king aspect.
Yeah, and something on that note is like Icelandic sagas, which majority of our evidence comes from, is written from like people who weren't really under aristocratic rule too. So like they even demote Odin to a certain extent in later folklore because of that. So like that's something to take into account. And there's also evidence that Tyr's cult was a lot bigger. Because if we look at the Roman interpretation of Germanic gods, it's pretty clear that Mars to them was similar to Tyr, right?
Yes.
So we have multiple accounts spanning a wide history of the Goths and like the continental Germans sacrificing to Mars just as much, or if not, like a little bit to the side
Right. Yeah.
of
Oh, yeah.
Mercury. So
Yeah. That's, and see, we'll never know 100% how they hierarchize Tyr versus Odin in the earliest times, whatever. But if we look at what we can reconstruct of Proto-Indo-European, and if we look at Celtic, which is nearby, to me it's possible that Odin and Tyr were more on an equal or more on a close to even footing at some point, but that it was understood that the sovereign, that the Mitra type is more the outward kind of face, and Odin the more esoteric inward side. Who knows? Maybe Tyr was always, maybe they were just so Odinic from the start that Tyr was always just not going to be on the same level as Odin, but he would have still, I think, had more importance than what we see in the later fragments. I'm talking about at the earliest, like Germanic or Proto-Germanic stage, or even the Roman times, maybe. I do think that he probably had more importance at some point, and it waned a bit in the stories that we have, at least.
There is a lot of work to be done on digging through like heroic sagas and trying to find the comparisons there, and like the continental Germanic stuff, where it seems like everybody else is on a little more equal footing with Odin.
Yeah,
the Odinic type figure.
Yeah, I don't see evidence that like Tyr would have been like more important, like the Sky Father, the way Zeus is. I don't see why that would be the case, or any evidence for that. We'll never know, but I'd be more prone to say that maybe they're closer to having just their own equal footing domains. But
well,
yeah,
what you see in a lot of pagan cultures generally, right, is that people have cultic bias,
yes,
especially
exactly.
in Germanic stuff, because like the Icelanders later on in their history, like they were farmers, right? They weren't really the aristocratic type if you look at them. And you see the elevation of Thor almost to that level. So and Thor was in the Eddas seen as like the lower caste god, not necessarily in other branches, but in Germanic lore.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if you look at it that way, like we definitely could have had a Tyr cult back in the days before any of this was written down, that was due, like it was just a cultic bias instead of something that was really standardized. I think
Yeah.
we're kind of spoiled by the Greek and Roman stuff because it is very standardized. Like there was a state cult and all that kind of thing that kind of puts everything together for you.
True. And yeah, I think that we get a certain rather narrow window with the text we have, unfortunately. And we do have, like, engravings, pictures of Tyr losing his hand, bractates, and things like that, showing that it was a popular mytheme, and so that most likely Tyr had an importance based around that. Also, I do think the Mars Thinxis identification is really strong, and I give my argument for why that should be taken seriously. That Tyr really is Mars Thinxis. If that's the case, that's very important to be the god of the thing, the assembly, and of course. Mitra of the Avesta is called the chief of assemblies among chiefs of assemblies. So he's like the assembly god, and it's the same for Lu. He's the god who brings the assemblies and is sort of rules the assemblies, and that's what Tyr is, or Mars Thinxis, if he is Tyr. So
there's something really interesting about that too, because Loki criticizes Tyr in Lokasana for having lost his right hand, aka not being able to really like be able to do justice right-handedly, right? Right. He's like, and he's also said in Gylfaginning he can't really settle disputes between people. I'm roughly paraphrasing. If I'm wrong, doesn't negate the point. But something we see in later Scandinavian and Icelandic stuff is that Forseti, Baldur's son, is actually the thing god. he's the one that is in the center of everything. Like they
Is
have
it-
an idol of
Oh,
him.
okay.
as
Oh,
well.
gotcha.
So
Yeah.
it's
He's a legal god.
interesting
He's very
to-
much the legal god, and the thing involved legal proceedings and things like that. So
yeah, and it may have been a case of like Balder overtook those aspects as well through his son
yeah,
Forseti.
and they're all connected very much. I think Forseti must continue some aspect of the Mitraic legalistic role. So yeah,
Something else to add as well is if we're taking the Roman interpretation of Mars equals Tyr seriously, he's the only other god to be said to receive human sacrifices. So that should be a pretty high statement on what his level was to some of the Germanic peoples.
right. That's a good point. And there were places named after him, like Tisland in Zealand, where an assembly took place. So makes sense with Mars Thinksis. So in Gylfaginning by Snorri, of course, we read that Tyr is, quote, most daring and best in stoutness of heart, and has much authority over victory in battle. It is good for men of valor to invoke him. It is a proverb that he is Tyr valiant, who surpasses other men and does not waver. He is wise, so that it is also said that he is the wise, so that it is also said that he that is wisest is Tyr prudent. So prudence, actually, that's extremely Mitraic, if that translation is accurate, because in Dumasil's terms, the Mitraic sovereign is this more august, prudent, wise in a sort of slowed down tempo kind of way. So prudence would perfectly match with that. Also, though, victory in battle, Zeus holds Nike, of course, and the Tyr rune is also known as the victory rune. So clearly that's an important role among the gods, and can connect to this sovereign. The Avestan Mithra rides with victory at his side, Verethregna, who embodies victory. So he is the god who rules victory, essentially. So it perfectly matches. Those are some of the reasons why we should think Tyr is actually the Mitra type. Yeah, he even Mithra of the Avesta even binds the hands of liars. So he binds hands. Of course, we know that Tyr is involved in a binding of Fenrir, which is involving another complex Mitra type mytheme, and that could be the next thing to show that Tyr really is Mitra type, I think, is to suggest another parallel to Yudhishthira, which is, as I go through it, as I argue at least, and you guys can see if you think this is convincing, but Yudhishthira of the Mahabharata is the focal point of a specific mytheme where they have to disarm this overwhelmingly powerful enemy named Drona. He's devastating their armies, and they hatch a plan to try to disarm and then neutralize him. And to do this, Yudhishthira has to take center stage, and he has to essentially tell a half lie or a half truth to Drona in order to get him to drop his weapons and basically make himself vulnerable to being neutralized. Very similar to how Tyr has to do this. Tyr has to offer his hand to Fenrir, their overwhelming enemy, in order to get him to let his guard down. And in doing so, Tyr is essentially telling a half lie by saying that, we will let you free, or however they exactly phrase it, I forget. But basically that, you'll be able to break free of this. And if we don't let you free, I'm giving you my hand for surety, so to speak. So he's essentially leading Fenrir on in a dishonest way, making him feel safe by putting his hand in his mouth, But ultimately, it is a deception. It is a lie, and Tyr loses that surety, loses that hand to Fenrir because of that lie. Now, in the Yudhishthira story, what happens is he has to say that the son of Drona has died in order to cause him to disarm himself and become vulnerable. The son of Drona is Ashvatthama, and Ashvatthama is also the name of a different elephant in the army. So it's a name confusion. What they do is they kill the elephant Ashvatthama, who has the same name as the son of Drona, and then Yudhishthira comes up to Drona, approaches Drona and says, Drona, Ashvatthama has died. And then at that moment, Krishna, who's on the side of the deceptive Yudhishthira and his side, has clarion horns blown, so some loud noise-making horns be blown right at this moment. And Yudhishthira says, but the elephant and not your son. So he actually tells a truth. He doesn't want to actually lie. But because the horns are so loud, and Yudhishthira is going along with this trick, with this ruse, because the horns are so loud, Drona can't hear the second part of the sentence. All he hears is, Ashvatthama has died. Ashvatthama has been killed. So Yudhishthira has not technically told a lie. He has gotten around telling a full lie, but he is allowing himself to take part in this deceptive ruse that still amounts to a half-truth, because he knows this is a deceptive trick to disarm Drona, but he goes along with it. And ultimately, Drona thinks that his son has died. Because of this, he falls down to the floor off of his horse or whatever he's riding, out of his chariot, that is, and he drops his weapons and starts weeping and grieving. And at that moment, their warrior, I think it's Drishtadyumna, he leaps in and kills Drona, basically neutralizes him. So this is very similar, of course, to Tyr's role. Tyr, as a Mitra type, Yudhishthira embodies perfect justice and truthfulness. He has to. That's what he is as Mitra, the god of the contract. Yet he allows himself to do this half-truth. As a punishment for this, sort of metaphysical punishment, Yudhishthira has this floating chariot that he always rides around in, and it floats 6 inches off the floor because of his perfect truthfulness and righteousness at all times. And it symbolizes that it has this magical power. After he has told this half-truth, that chariot no longer floats above the ground. It now only rides on the ground. So he has lost the symbol of his perfect truthfulness by participating in this half-truth to disarm the powerful enemy. That, of course, is exactly the core of that is exactly what Tyr does and what he loses. He allows himself to participate in this half-truth to disarm and neutralize the powerful enemy, Fenrir, and he immediately loses his right arm, which symbolizes his perfect justice, as a direct result of this. So you can see, if you look at the core sort of aspects of these myths, that they are the same sort of mythemes, the same motifs, and with the same symbolic outcome. Therefore, I think it's too coincidental, and that this basically proves that Tyr, in his core myth, this disarming of the powerful enemy and losing the symbol of his perfect justice, is Mitra. This is a Mitra myth type, and that is why Yudhishthira also has this same sequence of symbolic events and loses his symbol of perfect truthfulness. Therefore, he's the god of truth who has paradoxically, symbolically lost the symbol of that. It's this intense sort of metaphysical and moral lesson where the god of this perfect virtue also symbolizes the sort of breaking of it for the greater good in the end times and all of that. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I did, because it's interesting. you could interpret the Yudhishthira myth a couple of ways too, because Krishna could be seen as like the Cuchulainn or Fenrir's parallel as well. If you listen to our other Mythstreams, you could make that connection. And he's the one instigating this loss of integrity, and in the same way, Fenrir's is the reason that he loses his hand. Krishna is the one who makes it a lie.
Yeah.
So it's even more of a good parallel because Krishna's involved.
Yeah, that's true.
Obviously, Drona is also an overwhelming enemy.
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
and then you have Ashvatthama afterwards, who
right
embodies Rudra. So
yeah. So I personally like the Drona. I don't think Drona is the same as Fenrir in any sense. He seems to be the incarnation of Brihaspati. But it is just this. It's more of the motif there, and then I wonder if, because Krishna is in this sort of tricky god who floats around and helps and guides the battle in a similar way that Athena is in the Iliad, and so I wonder if it's this deeper like Vishnu aspect that's on a different plane doing different things. On a deeper level, or if there was any like screwy business with how the Mahabharata was being geared more and more toward Krishna, and that he got put over time. But I don't know about that either, because there could be just
don't ever ask an Indian, but I mean, Krishna is definitely a little mischievous a lot more than they would like you to believe, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, but no, it could be something going way back, like connecting with Athena, connecting with Fenrir qualities for sure, here and there, but that's more complex.
Yeah, and he's like especially in Vishnu's like the later stories, he's seen as definitely a trickster in that sense, but like also wolves were known for that. That's like cunning. Generally, especially in Norse stuff. So that's another very loose connection, but it goes back to his role as like the best of the Maruts.
Yes. So okay, so hopefully that gives a strong argument for both Tyr and Balder paralleling Yudhishthira, and also this Vidura who's connected to Yudhishthira. And so you can see how kind of the best explanation is that some shifting of emphasis went on, but there's this two interconnected god types of Tyr and Balder, and of Mitra and Aryaman. From there, what came to be kind of a crucial connecting point for me was the Iliad on this point specifically, because I realized, if you understand the Iliad stuff more, it could be this kind of bridge between these deep Mahabharata and Vedic myths over to Celtic and other branches that we're having a hard time understanding. And so, as we discussed last time, Menelaus really has this strong Mitra quality to him. He's less aggressively violent, less of a warlord than his brother Agamemnon, who's more of the Varuna. He tries to pacify Agamemnon. He even directly is said to essentially symbolize the peace or truce oath that they violate. Menelaus is, which is exactly what Mitra is. He's the embodiment of the contract and also of friendship and the peace that can come from that. But Menelaus is also the one to kind of lead. He is the focal point of the retribution that the whole war is about. He ultimately, achieves the victory, helps to achieve the victory, in the end, and all that. So what I kind of noticed is that there is a scene in the Iliad involving Menelaus. Once you have your focus on Menelaus, once you have your eyes on Menelaus, you realize that he has a myth just like Balder. Why does he have a myth just like Balder? You can only understand this once you understand what I just described, which is that there is this Mitra and Aryaman, these two types that are intertwined and that in the Norse have kind of shifted emphasis a little bit. But actually, this kind of mytheme may originally have focused more on the Mitra type. And so it makes perfect sense when you see that Menelaus gets shot by an arrow in a very uncannily similar scene to the shooting of Balder. So what happens is, like I said, Menelaus is said directly to essentially be embodying the truce oath. They have a truce, a temporary truce in the war. And after Menelaus gets shot during this truce oath, Agamemnon says, "You have by shooting him, you have trampled your truce oath under feet." And so he is embodying that peaceful truce, that oath. Menelaus is also under a prophecy, which is, I think it's described more in detail in the Odyssey, and it is prophesied that Menelaus will not die in the war, so he's kind of protected by fate to actually not die, and that he will go, go back and live happily and be taken up to Elysium in the end, all of that. And he's also being protected in this scene by Athena herself. So he has these magical protections around him, essentially, these divine protections, just like Balder does with his invulnerability. And what happens is the truce is ongoing at this moment, and Athena has her own purposes, her own goals for the war, and she wants this truce to be broken, actually, at this point. So she disguises herself magically, and she goes up to one of the Trojan warriors named Pandarus. And I think, I can't remember right now, but I think she disguises herself as his brother or someone that he knows, a friend or brother. And she tells him, you have to shoot Menelaus. You must do this, et cetera, et cetera. And so she goads Pandarus on while wearing a magical disguise, and she guides his arrow, essentially, tells him to shoot at Menelaus. When Pandarus shoots the arrow, she actually guides it away from his vitals so that it will only strike him, a temporarily wounding blow in the abdomen. Nonetheless, you have this same mytheme of the magically disguised trickster who goads whomever to fire the projectile at the Mitraic related figure who is embodying sort of a divine sort of peace that is also protected by divine invulnerabilities. All of this happens, and finally the arrow strikes Menelaus, and it comes close to death, but he is taken out of the battle essentially for a time, and he has to be healed by physicians, and ultimately he's brought back. So this follows the same pattern again of the death of Balder. All of those same core things happen, and he temporarily goes to hell and then is brought back. So again, you can't understand why does Menelaus match Balder here unless you understand what I described with Balder actually matching Yudhishthira mythically and some shifts going on. Once you understand all of this, so you can look at the Celtic material, I realize, and the Welsh god Lle, which is the Welsh version of Lugh, the Irish Lugh, or Lugus. The Welsh Lle has an entire narrative mythos extremely close to Menelaus of the Iliad, specifically. And not only that, but he has a scene, once again, extremely reminiscent of the death of Balder, the temporary death of Balder. And what happens, of course, is that Lle, he has a wife named Blodeuwedd, and Blodeuwedd is not faithful to him, and a hunter comes to her house, her kingdom, or what have you, while Lle is out, and they begin, a love affair, and Blodeuwedd tells the hunter Granu the Radiant One tells him that Llē has these magical invulnerability protections on him, these paradoxical things where he can only be killed if a set of these very difficult, seemingly paradoxical circumstances are fulfilled. Then a projectile, a weapon, can pierce his invulnerability and kill him. She tells Granu the secret to doing this, goads him to do it, and he then, and then she sort of tricks Llē into putting himself in this vulnerable position. He trusts her, and basically he has to stand with one foot on a goat and one foot in a bucket of water underneath some eaves or something like that. And it has to be at a certain time, and has to be with a spear that's forged for a year only on Sundays or something like this. I can't remember exactly. All these things come in place, and the naive Llē, who thinks he's invulnerable, has the spear of Granu be thrown at him in this context, and it mortally wounds him, essentially. What happens then is that he seems to be, on the verge of death. He transforms into an eagle. This eagle flies up to seemingly, a magical tree, like an otherworldly tree, apparently. He perches up in this tree, and while he's up there, he's, in this living death state, because his body is said to be dropping decayed flesh like carrion. And Gwydion, his sort of guardian or overseer, has to hunt him down and uses a sow to follow kind of the trail of and to find where this carrion is dropping from this tree in order to locate him. They then bring him down, and just like Menelaus, he has to then be healed by physicians, which is another interesting connection. So it is this interesting sequence, and ultimately, in retribution, Llē chases Granu down and crosses a body of water, a river, actually, specifically to do this, which is also interesting because Menelaus crosses the sea to go to Troy. So it's another element that's there. And he ultimately performs this, spear throwing feat where he throws his spear through a slab of stone that Granu's hiding behind and kills him, and then punishes Blodeuwedd as well. What happens in the Iliad is that in retribution, Menelaus challenges. Let's see. Oh no, rather, sorry, that's a different connection. I will just read this quick little summary to get these points across, if I can. Is there anything I'm forgetting or that you guys want to add while I'm rambling here?
I can't think of anything, but it is interesting that he flies to a tree that is. What makes it otherworldly? Because I haven't read the myth in quite a while. Is it just something? Is it just a specific?
I guess the symbolic aspect of it's just that he transforms into an eagle and is kind of in this death state there, and
either way,
that's all it is. Yeah.
Either way, it fits like this idea of a purgatory state.
Yeah. I'm saying
he's not around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Rather than anything explicit. That's good to clarify. So, okay. So the uncanny correspondences between the Llē myth and the Menelaus myth are as follows. Granu Pebber the Radiant comes to Llē's kingdom while Llē is visiting his maternal great uncle, Math Fab Mathonwy. And in the Iliad, Paris of the Astonishing Beauty comes to Menelaus' kingdom while Menelaus is about to leave for the funeral of his maternal grandfather, Catreus. So a similar point where the incoming seducer or whatever, rival male, comes while they are out visiting a grandfather or great uncle type figure. Granu is there on a hunting expedition, while Paris is there on a pretended diplomatic expedition. Thlei's wife, Blodaiath, commits adultery and conspires with Granu. Paris conspires with the goddess Aphrodite in order to adulterously steal Menelaus' wife, Helen. Thlei marshals all of his kingdom and crosses the river Cunval to pursue Granu and Blodaiath. And it says, quote, then they called together the whole of Gwynedd and set forth to Ardudwy, unquote. So in the Thlei story, he actually marshals his whole kingdom to do this pursuit, his whole army, so to speak, just like in the Iliad. Menelaus marshals all of the allied kingdoms and crosses the Aegean Sea to pursue Paris and Helen. Thlei is under a magical protection against death, which is a kind of spoken fate pronounced over him. Menelaus is under a prophecy that the gods will not allow him to die and will take him to Elysium at the end of his life, which Athena also divinely ensures in the scene. And then there is this duel scene that is very similar in both, where, of course, the roles are split between Pandarus and Paris. In the Iliad, as I mentioned, Pandarus shoots the arrow, but also Menelaus then challenges Paris, who is the seducer, the rival. He challenges Paris in a scene extremely similar to when Thlei finally catches up and challenges Granu, the seducer. And in that scene, in both cases, the rival kind of shrinks back in fear when Menelaus or Lu comes to confront him. So we see, let's see. Granu, in fear, begs his attendants to stand in for him and receive the blow, while when Paris and Menelaus arrive at the duel, it is said that Paris first becomes sick at heart and then shrank back in the ranks. And Thlei and Granu finally face off in a formal confrontation to put their dispute to rest. Thlei, for his part, throws his spear through a slab of stone that Granu hides behind. And Menelaus and Paris facing off, Menelaus throws his spear through Paris's shield, and Paris is rescued at the last second to continue that story. So he even throws his spear through Paris's shield, just as Granu has the stone shield that Thlei throws his spear through. And then also, of course, the magical wounding that I described by Pandarus and Granu. Okay, so I think this is the key bridge that you have to build. If you want to understand this complex topic, you have to build a bridge. And the bridge is from understanding that Menelaus is fundamentally Mitraic, and that this mytheme of the magical wounding is usually at least a Mitraic type in the ways that we've explained, that it connects to the death of Balder, and that this builds this bridge over to the Welsh Thlei. And Thlei has this, his entire narrative is uncannily similar to what Menelaus does in the Iliad, but with its own details. Okay, so it's very hard to get this all across. So are there any questions, any things that I'm needing to clarify?
So these myths specifically are more so like, I think these are Welsh, right?
So that's Welsh, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So like, there's plenty of stuff we can get into on the Irish side of things. I'm not very
yeah, exactly. Once you understand the Welsh connection, that's like where the bridge is built. I think the strongest mythic bridge. But then we also have other material that we already know that Lu is the same as Thlei linguistically, but we can now kind of understand the Irish material in that context. And as we described last time, the name Lu, essentially the top two etymological theories for the name Lu are that it means either oath or light. And personally, I think, if you look at the article of Gail Hiley or Hiley, and also the work of Garrett Olmsted, they both support that it is from Lugion, and this means oath. So that Lu's name, most likely, according to them, means oath. So his name, he's essentially the god whose name means oath. That is very much Mitra. And I explained last time also that among the Tuatha Dé Danann, when they come to Ireland, Nuada is the first king and is connected to waters and all these kinds of things, especially with Nodens, his British version. That is the Varuna type, which we've gone into. There is then an interstitial ruling figure named Bress, and we can go into this in future, but Bress is the sun god, actually. He's only a temporary king, though. He's this conflicted sovereign in the middle. It then transitions into Lu being the second of the main two sovereigns other than Bress, who is this kind of center point sun god in the middle. So out of those, Lu is the latter half god, and that's why he has his festival in August. August sort of beginning this latter half leading into autumn, this autumnal sovereign. And this is why Lu is the latecomer. His entire myth is about him coming late to the kingdom of the gods. When he comes to the doorkeeper tells him, we already have all these things. You're a latecomer, essentially. He's telling Lu, we already have someone who, is good at this and good at that and good at all of the things. And then Lu says, yes, but do you have someone who is the best at all of them at once? And so that is Lu being this latecomer who then rises to be the sovereign of the second half, the sovereign of day, and his name means oath. And it is said that in the fate of the children of Turin, which is sort of a late story, but nonetheless, it is said that when Lu's face, or when Lu is approaching, someone looks over and says, it looks like the sun coming over the hills. So he is being described as solar, as bright, all of these things. And yes, I also show in my book that oftentimes the Mitra type has this kind of climactic moment of throwing his spear through one of the final enemies, and sort of this turning point that leads to their final victory. It's a bit more complex, which I won't go into it, but I suggest that that's another possible Mitra role, and that's what Lu does, finally defeating Balor with this sort of climactic spear throw in the battle. And that connects to, of course, Tyr being the god who ensures victory, being the god of victory, and the Mithra type in general being god of victory, because it is this climactic moment of his spear throw that kind of victory follows from. And he then achieves the final victory as the sovereign, which leads to peace and stability. And he is the sovereign of that. Okay, so let's see. Any other things that you can think of?
So to go back to Bress, it wasn't there something where Lu comes to an agreement or like a deal with Bress in the same way that like in Mithraism, which we'll probably get to later.
Yeah.
Mithras, as the initiate, makes a pact with the sun.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
wasn't there a similar thing about that? I remember.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good point. And so this is something we could discuss now or whenever, but basically, it is. Let's see. Was it Julius Evola's article on the Mitra?
On Mithras, yeah.
Well, he's basing that on
the Mithras.
He's basing that on what's his name's sort of classic study of the Mithraic mysteries. I'm forgetting. I didn't look at this recently, but
I am also forgetting. It's been a while.
Yeah, Josephus, do you remember the guy whose work he's kind of using?
I don't remember the guy's name. I do recall
like the biggest name in
either him or one of his associates working on the Italian translation of the so-called Mithraic liturgy from the Greek magical papyri. So that's probably going to be like relevant in his interpretation of Mithraic mysteries. There's a whole debate on whether this text from the Greek magical papyri does in fact reflect Mithraic mysteries or not. At any rate, it probably has something in common with them, and it definitely could be helpful in understanding their sense.
Yes, he does touch on that at some points, but this particular thing, it's not reliant on that. So
No,
it's more about the
it's
more about the iconography he's interpreting, and he seems to suggest that sort of the sequence of the iconography shows, that the Mitraic figure who is born from the rock, he then has to like confront the sun god in some way, and that then they are shown as friends afterwards, and there's the celebrated meal with the Tauroctony as the center point of that. But in any case, his argument is that the iconography shows that the Mitraic god has to confront the solar god, the sun itself, who he has to confront with his solar gaze, like overcome him with his power of steadiness in his gaze or something. And that once he overcomes him, it's like he's united with him as friends, because he's Mitra, the friend, the creator of friendship. And so the point would be that he defeats the sun god in this confrontation, and then incorporates the power of the sun by uniting with the power of the sun in some way.
So
and that this explains like Mithra Sol Invictus. So the unconquerable soul, the unconquerable sun Mithra, is like when he has become one with the sun power in his ultimate sort of victory. Yeah.
So in Avola's actual article, so to break it down in a little simpler terms, I guess it might be simpler, I don't know. But what it is that Mithras takes the solar power, like basically the solar like Shakti almost, or power, by being able to weather the storm of the physical world. Hence, like the motif we have in the Mythraeums of Mithras coming out of a rock, the rock first bursting with water, the waters that like intoxication in the material world, and then the rock representing matter itself. But my main thing was not even that. It was that it displays a mythology that we don't really have a full grasp of, like the iconography that we get with Mithras making a pact with the sun and becoming friends with the sun and ultimately becoming solar himself. I think it was something that was also touched upon in Lou's mythos as well with Bress.
Yes. So basically, it seems that Lou and also Hle, because Hle's opponent is Granu the Radiant. And I argue at least in some role, of this rival wooer, rival lover, that Paris has a role that could have been like a sun god role in that, because Surya, the sun god, is said to be the lover of Ushas, the dawn, and she follows him like a lover. That could be coming back to this. It's complex because there's different changes and things like that in different versions. For example, in the Irish, we have Bress is not the Bress is the spouse of Ushas, so that's exactly what we would see in the Vedic. With and we can go into this in the sun god stream in the future, but then Bress is not the rival, the adulterous rival of Lugh in the Irish version. See, so something has potentially shifted there, where the rival, the adulterous theme, which is present actually in the Lugh story, is taken by Kermite instead, a different figure who could be then like an aspect of the sun. Much more complicated issue, but the point is,
it might be worth noting that even in the Greek epic cycle, we have a similar situation. So we have Paris as the adulterous sun god who abducts Helen and steals her wealth. And then we have Memnon, who is also presumably a sun god. Nick Allen has a good argument for this. He's the son of the dawn, and he's a parallel of Karna, who is clearly the incarnation of the sun god in the Mahabharata. Karna, however, does never abduct or have sex with the dawn goddess Draupadi, the incarnation of the dawn goddess Draupadi. So clearly, it's possible that the two sun gods, one being adulterous and the other only fighting on the adulterous god's side, might have been an older trait that we imagine, right? It's not innovative necessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. Those are good points. And we can go into sun god stream stuff in the future. The point is, Bress, which we can show in a sun god stream, and I've shown elsewhere, very much has this Karna mythos, especially in his conception and birth story. And that
I don't think he realized he muted himself.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. So yeah, that's exactly right. And so we have Bress. He's very much, the Karna type, especially in his birth and conception story. And Bress becomes this king right between Nuada and Lu at the center point for a temporary time, which would be like summer, the middle of the year, when things become the heat of the sun becomes harsh and creates drought. That's like the rule of Bress. Anyways, stuff for a future stream since we're running out of time here. But to get that across, Lu defeats Bress ultimately, along with Balor, and he makes Bress submit, forces him to give him knowledge of when to plant. So he gains solar fertility knowledge from him, apparently. And in some versions, he forces him to drink poison. I think there's a version where he doesn't necessarily do that. But anyways, this could be a variation on the defeat of the sun god, where Lu conquers him and takes his sun magic wisdom and sort of gains the power of the sun to be the ultimate sovereign. I think that is a variation in its own way. I would like to say I did find something like this in the Jaiminiya Brahmana. So I was reading this book by Hank Bodowitz called Vedic Ethics and Mythology or something like that. And he describes how there's this esoteric path in the Jaiminiya Brahmana of like overcoming the sphere of the sun and elevating to go to this higher sphere of past the world of the sun for this sort of initiate, right? And this is kind of reminds me of what is probably at the core esoterically of this, because this is like an esoteric myth about the path of the king, of the sovereign. He has to go through this initiatic sequence in order to become the perfected sovereign who overcomes and incorporates the power of the sun. And that is what the Mithraic mysteries were all about, seemingly, presumably, if we want to interpret it this way at least.
That's pretty similar to
the Jaiminiya Brahmana. It's there in Egyptian mythology, and yeah. What else?
So that's pretty similar to what a lot of later Neoplatonists said, who were also in the Mithraic cults, that the sun is because there's also something in like Vola's breakdown of the mysteries is like they didn't really believe the sun was an entity, right? What they thought it was representative of is like the solar power and will that comes from like the divine masculine, aka like the ultimate sovereign or king, right? True. So as his interpretation hinged upon the initiate doing reenacting the myths of Mithras and becoming like him. Right. The sun is actually emblematic of the hidden sun, the source of everything, Tuhen, the one. Mm-hmm. So it kind of lines up there. You're supposed to surpass the sun and ultimately reach the state of the one.
Yes. And this is a particular path of that which corresponds to the sovereign of the day, the Mitra type, who kind of symbolizes the soul of the king in his path towards perfection. So I think that's all there, and that can personally, I think that explains why Mithra gets called Sol Invictus, but then also Jupiter does, because they're coming from different places, but they're kind of converging on this concept.
Yeah,
whether they realized it or not, they had certain similar things attached to them that led them there, I think.
Well, also something we see is we got a lot of solar deities, we got a lot of lunar deities in every pantheon, right? Does that mean they're all does that mean they're all in some way an offspring of one sun deity or lunar deity? Probably not. It means they're probably imbibing in that same power of light, or I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain that kind of thing, but they're kind of taking on the same mantle, I would say, of that energy. I don't know what you would want to call it, but
yeah. Well, so that hopefully shows another alignment, though, just Lu defeating Brest, the sun god, just like we see in the Mitra mysteries. That kind of is another parallel that can connect Lu to Mitra and Mithra. Mithra in the Avesta is said to catch the lying sinner, the sinner, with his long arms. It specifically says this more than once in the Mihir Yasht of the Avesta. Lu's famous epithet is Laufada, which means he of the long arm. It means of the long arm. So Lu of the long arm is his famous name. He is said to, let's see, what else? Of course, I've mentioned so many of the things already. He brings the assembly. He brings retribution to the sons of Turin and to Balor and them. So he fulfills this retributive role. And he has solar things attached to him more so than, whereas Nu of the Nodens has more watery nocturnal aspects. So I think ultimately the idea that Lu could be Varunian is mistaken. If anything, at best, he could be Mitraic, but incorporating the Varunian side of sovereignty at times, because as we've seen, because the Mitra type is the last one, he absorbs all of the sovereignty, including Varunian roles sometimes, as the super sovereign. So Lu could be Varunian only in that sense, but much more so he's dominated by the Mitraic qualities and myths. So then from there, I think the most important thing is to realize that the conception and birth story of Lu and Zeus are incredibly similar, and that we have, this mytheme that seems to then have an actual Indo-European or otherwise, or whatever, a shared root basis somehow, probably Indo-European, between the story of Lu and Zeus, because we have this famous mytheme, and of course, similar stories appear with other figures, but these are within the primary pantheon of gods. These are the ones that match, and so that's more important. Of course, there are other legendary heroes who are going to have similar versions of this sort of semi-generic myth, but if one god in the Greek pantheon has this basic story, and then one main god in the Irish pantheon has this main story, you're talking about a different level of importance of that correspondence. So Lu, of course, his father conceives him with Ethlio or Enyu, and her father is Balor of the Evil Eye, and it is prophesied that if his daughter has a son, that son will kill him and overtake him, displace him, and so he keeps his daughter in a tower, so this won't happen. But Kian, of course, goes there and has children with the daughter, and the main child that comes from that is Lu, and Lu then returns, and in different versions, different ways, he ultimately kills Balor. So the prophecy comes true, and he takes over ultimately as this latter perfected sovereign who encompasses all skills within himself, because he's the culmination of everything, culmination of all powers. And of course, that's essentially the core of the Zeus story because it's prophesied to Cronus, that his son will displace him, and so he tries to swallow his children, and then of course he gets deceived by the stone, and Zeus gets out and ultimately defeats and overtakes Cronus, and becomes this latter perfected sovereign. So it's a core similarity of these things. And then we have also argued and shown how the mothers, Rhea and Ethliu or Enya, are probably of the same type, this Saraswati-related goddess. And so these things kind of all fall together. Also, Balor of the evil eye is seemingly this destructive Rudra, this destructive side of the Rudras, which then would fall into place very cleanly with an equivalency with Cronus, because Cronus is the Rudra, the primordial Rudra. The Irish Balor is a more negative, narrowed down side of the Rudra power, seemingly, because this one eye power that is petrifying or fiery, bringing death, that is actually the destructive Rudra eye in other places. And there are other reasons to think that Balor is actually this narrowed down, negativized picture of the Rudra, the obstructing Rudra, the sort of the stern Rudra who is stopping, who is trying to stop the final sovereign from coming, in some sense.
And also, we even have a name of Odin that may even be directly related.
Exactly.
So as like the baleful eye. So
yeah. Balaigr, which
Balaigr,
baleful or fiery eyed, and of course Balor of the evil eye. The baleful is evil. It's literally almost a direct translation. It's fascinating, and also even I go into in my book how the powers of Odin's eyes are said to like petrify opponents in battle and stuff like that. Exactly like descriptions of Balor as having like a basilisk-like eye that petrifies, and very similar powers.
And this could actually be traced back to like some sort of like actual practice that was done back in the day, because like if you read about the Einherjar at all, there's a connection made with a specific tribe that were like called the Einherji, I think. And what they would do is paint themselves in a way to where their eyes were seen more clearly. So when you're raiding somebody at night, you just see their eyes and you get freaked out before you even fight them, right? So it was like even like a tactic. So
it's just fascinating. Like all the other one-eyed figures are actually Rudraic in the Celtic and Norse world, and then you have Balor, who seems like this bad guy, quote unquote. But once you realize he parallels Cronus, you can see that he's just this sort of like caricaturized or just like negative, narrowed down version of the negative side of this deity type, because there's a complex outflowing of the myths where this kind of opposition has to happen. He has to take the oppositional role in relation to the sovereign, and I think that that opposition of the Rudra side, it's like this obstacle that helps to perfect the final sovereign, and you even see Lu bringing out in himself the Balor power. He's the grandson of Balor. Lu is, just like Zeus is the son of Cronus, and in the battle before going in, he does this magical crane dance pose where he closes one eye to invoke some kind of battle power. Lu himself does this in the final battle, and that's like him invoking in himself this Rudraic Balor power. So it's not like it symbolizes pure evil. It is like this Rudraic power that has to kind of come through to even perfect the final sovereign, because it is there within him into all the way to the end. So
and it might definitely, like I kind of think it's definitely related to later stories that we have, or later folklore, rather, of witches and antagonists in stories using the evil eye against people.
Yeah. I mean, the evil eye is a very broad concept. So
it is.
It can be like, it can be evil, it can be Rudraic, and those things. It's just whatever is destructive, I guess, in a sense. But here specifically, because we have the narrative myths, we can pinpoint it to a Rudra actually related mytheme, which is fascinating. And then the last thing I think that really like drives this home is what we've gone into, and that unfortunately Arno couldn't be here, but he pinpointed the fact that that actually Zeus's battle against Typhon is not the thunderer versus the typical serpent. So one of these sort of stumbling blocks, one of these things that makes people think Zeus is like Indra, is that he fights Typhon, who is like serpentine in some way. But we, in our other streams, and you can just go watch our other streams for a much more in-depth deep dive on Typhon, the Typhon video. And actually, like, Typhon is this much more multifarious, complex figure who has all of these different animal voices coming from him and different body parts that are of different form. And so he's not just the typical Vritra Jormungandr. And the whole myth around him is not the same as the thunderer fighting that serpent type. So it's a complete mistake to just think that Typhon is the typical serpent. He's actually from this core myth type that we showed, is this negativized. Once again, these good gods can be negativized, just like Balor. There can be a negative, aka destructive side of the Rudra type. There can be a destructive side of the Vishnu type, and that's what Typhon is essentially, and even Fenrir, because they come from this core mythos of this sort of overpowering god who has multiple animal forms, and they're even described as like switching between each other rapidly in this chaotic way, as I've pointed out before. And yeah, Vishnu has serpentine and aquatic fish associations. He also has canine forms and associations, and all of these come through actually in Typhon himself. And the way that you can really see that it's the same core battle, the core mytheme shared with Tyr and Fenrir, is the fact that specifically in the battle, before Zeus overcomes Typhon, Typhon first takes his sinews from his arms and legs, I think. But I've shown how the arm connection is more consistent, and goes through to even how Horus fighting Set. The ancients understood that Horus fighting Set equals Zeus fighting Typhon, and Set causes Horus to have his arm cut off due to the events of their battle, just like Tyr loses his arm, exactly the same. And Horus is this late coming all sovereign who completes the cycle as well. So it is this consistent theme, and Typhon is instead in this role. He's just expressing the more serpentine side of this more complex underlying deity who had multiple animal forms. And you can see that with the loss of the sinews of Zeus's arm in the battle, and then finally that he is bound under the mountain, which is like an axis mundi, and Fenrir is bound to a stone, which is like an axis mundi.
It's kind of like a pillar if you look at
exactly
how it's described. Yeah,
exactly. So you have to understand those contextual parts of the story to realize the Typhon story actually supports Zeus as Mitra and not as Indra, because we have the actual serpent, the thunderer serpent battle elsewhere with like Heracles and Hydra or whoever. There are other possible versions of that.
And then you also have Kukalain
Yes.
being bound to the pillar and then chopping off Lou's
Yeah.
hand as he gets his head chopped off.
Exactly. And so that, again, that's a great kind of ending point. I have to get going, unfortunately, because I wish we could talk about these specific things more, but we have in our other streams. So we're kind of fine on that. If you guys would just watch our Cuchulainn and Typhon streams, there's a lot more on this specific topic. But we have, in conclusion, we have Cuchulainn, who is the hound, who has to be restrained and pacified with 3 successive vats and all of that. And he turns into a terrible monster and threatens everything. In the final confrontation of Cuchulainn, it is Lugith who appears and forces Cuchulainn essentially to bind himself because they've wounded him. He causes Cuchulainn to bind himself to a standing stone, and then he ultimately beheads and cuts off the arm of Cuchulainn. Or rather, okay, so he beheads Cuchulainn, and that causes Cuchulainn to drop his sword, and the sword of Cuchulainn, the hound, severs the arm of Lugith in this moment, making Lugith become the one-armed figure, just like Tyr is. Tyr, confronting and subduing the bound wolf, loses his arm. Lugith, confronting and forcing the bound hound to subdue himself, loses his arm by being severed. It's this exact same mytheme.
Also, yes. I want to bring up before you got to go. There are various statues found in like French Gaul or Gallic France, I should say.
Yes, clues like Narsima. Yeah, sorry.
But and that's actually pretty relevant because these statues like all embody like a wolf, a lion, like they're mixed in with various monsters.
Yeah.
Or
you didn't happen to find one, did you?
I did actually. I'll send it in the chat real quick. Sorry.
Cool. No, it's okay.
I'll send it on the Discord.
That's okay. But in conclusion, sorry, did you have more to say on that?
Well, yeah, because he's holding an arm in his mouth in every one of those statues, so I think it's pretty clear connection that it is meant to be Cuchulainn, and offerings were made to these statues. We know from archaeological evidence, but it is very speculative.
Right. No, I think it's great. There is probably evidence when you see a wolf biting a hand, it is probably of this type, and things related. Did you send that? Okay, yeah,
I did.
Cool. All right, one moment. Here it is.
Also, while we're at the end here,
okay, here it is. There it is.
Yeah. While we're at the end here, I just wanted to address someone in the chat. Set is not Yahweh. I'm just gonna say that.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny because the mythemes we have are like Yahweh. The Vishnu type would be closest to Ishmael and to the golden calf, the center of whoever's being worshipped in the golden calf, actually, but Yahweh is more in Indra and Rudra related roles, if anything, that I've shown. So it's complicated, of course, because they're just borrowing from wherever. But okay, and yeah. So in conclusion, that shows that Lugith is right there again in that Tyr role, which is the Zeus role, confronting this terrifying, Vishnu type, and having his arm injured, severed at that moment, because Lu is the Mitra type, and so is Zeus. Okay, so hopefully that was a lot of material, and will give you guys a lot to think about. Thank you guys, Kallin and Josephus, for joining me today, and hope that wasn't too kind of fast-paced, but it was a lot of fun for me, so thanks for being here.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Thank you for inviting us, and see you next time.
All right, see you next time, and thanks to everyone for watching. Okay, bye.